Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to another installment of Analyzing the Address, where we revisit the khutbah, talk about a little bit additional detail, add additional information, context, commentary that we were unable to provide given the time constraints of the khutbah, and also afford you the opportunity to provide any feedback and ask you any questions you may have about the contents of the khutbah. And the title of today's khutbah was, "It is not enough to know, we have to act like we know." And we began the khutbah by mentioning that our religion is a religion which is highly concerned with literacy. Literacy in general, and spiritual religious literacy in particular. And we cited the verse which is indicative, the first words of revelation revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, which are indicative of the fact that our religion is clearly concerned with Muslims reading, studying, learning, and increasing their knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet, "Iqra bismi rabbikal ladhi khalaq." Read in the name of your Lord who created. And we went on after that to talk about how our religious literature is filled with texts which encourage, which incite, which emphasize studying and learning, and encourage us to actively seek knowledge of Allah, knowledge of His religion, etc., and so on. And what I would like to do is mention some of those ayat and hadith again, and add some additional commentary to those ayat and hadith and clarity to those ayat and hadith, which we were unable to do during the khutbah. So the first ayah that we mentioned was the ayah from Surah Muhammad, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Fa'alam annahu la ilaha illallah." Know that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah. And we mentioned that if you notice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that He wants us to know that there is no deity worthy of worship except Him. He doesn't want us to just say it with our tongues. He doesn't want us to just think it in our minds. And He doesn't want us to simply believe it because we were brought up to believe it. But rather He wants us to know. And knowledge requires learning. It necessitates and requires that we put in some type of effort in studying and acquiring it. It's not something that we are born with. We can't claim to know if we haven't studied or been taught. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, He says, "Wallahu akhrajakum min butuni ummahatikum la ta'lamuna shay'a." Allah took you out of your mother's wombs, and when He did so, you knew nothing. So no person can claim to know anything that they haven't actively studied or they haven't practically been taught. And so this is important. We can't claim to know anything about Allah except what Allah has taught us and what we have actively sought to learn. طيب, ثم بعد ذلك, another verse that we mentioned was the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. He says, ask the people of knowledge about the things that you do not know, about those matters that you have no knowledge yourself. And here I would like to point out a common mistake that occurs in our community, which is contradictory to the instruction that we've been given in this ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the layman, tells the unlearned, to learn from the learned, to ask them about the religion, to find out what is right and what is wrong. And He doesn't tell us to do that so we can ignore them, so we can dismiss them. He tells us to do that so that we will take their advice and apply it. Otherwise, what would be the benefit of Him ordering us to ask them if He doesn't expect us to take their advice and apply it? The reason why I mention this is because quite oftentimes, although we have been instructed to ask the people of knowledge, rather than ask the scholars, many people, they tell the scholars. They dictate to them what they should and shouldn't do. Rather than asking them, even if they ask them a question, they ask them in a way as if to what? To dictate what the answer should be. And it's not uncommon for imams, for example, to be basically forced to do things that they tell their congregations or their congregants or their parishioners, things that they tell their congregants and parishioners are wrong. They tell them these things are wrong, and the congregants tell them, okay, do this. And they'll tell them, well, we shouldn't do that because Allah said or because His Messenger said. And they'll say, thank you for informing us that. Now, can you do it? And can you do this? And can you do it like this? They're dictating to them instead of listening to them the way Allah is telling us, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. And I'll give a few examples just for clarity. So, for example, one of the common practices in some Muslim cultures, not Islamic teachings, is after someone passes away, people will gather and parts of the Quran will be distributed amongst them. And each person will be asked to read that part and then offer the reward for that tilawah on behalf to Allah, on behalf of the deceased. And they call it al-khatam al-Quran. Some people do it shortly after the death. Sometimes they have a specific day from the time of death that they will gather for this purpose. And people will come to a mosque and they'll tell the imam, okay, we want you to do this. We want you to organize this. We want you to lead this, right? We want you to be a participant in it. And that imam will say, you know, really, there's no basis for this in the Quran or the Hadith. And if it were something good, the Prophet would have taught us, or Allah would have revealed it. And so we really shouldn't do this. There are other ways to benefit your deceased loved one. These are some of those ways. And the people will just what? They'll totally summarily dismiss what the person is saying and say, okay, thank you for all that beneficial information. Now, the question is, can we do it on Saturday night? And can we do it at this time? And after we do it, can we have a meal? They'll just continue to basically dictate and run roughshod over the imam and maybe even twist his arm, not only to basically sign off on this, but also to be an active participant in it. Another example is Salat al-Ghaib. So for example, when a person dies, we are allowed under certain specific circumstances to pray Salat al-Ghaib on behalf of that deceased person. And the circumstances that permit that are, one, that we are certain or relatively certain that no one offered prayer for this deceased person. The second thing is that that deceased person, their body is unable to be what? To be present. It is not possible for us to pray over their body because of various circumstances. If those two conditions are present, we are allowed to pray what we call Salat al-Ghaib. But if one or both of those conditions is absent, we are not allowed to pray Salat al-Ghaib. But you have some masajid where the people will come and say, my relative died in Sudan, my relative died in Qatar, my relative died in Masr, in Egypt, my relative died in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and can you pray Salat al-Ghaib? And the imam will say, okay, these countries sound like countries, or these places sound like places where there's lots of Muslims, so are you sure that no one prayed for him? Oh, no, I know they prayed for him, because he used to go to this really big mosque and he was well known by the people. And the day that he passed away, it was the people who came to pray for him. There were so many people that there were people praying outside. The person will say something like this. And then the imam will explain, well, if that's the circumstance, we can't pray Salat al-Ghaib because we only pray Salat al-Ghaib for the person who no prayer was offered for him. And the people will say, thank you very much for that information, but, you know, we want you to do this. We're expecting you to do this. We'll be hurt. We'll be upset. We'll be offended if you don't do it, even though you're telling us that religiously we're not supposed to do it. Another example, just one final example, is an indazawaj. When people get married and they begin this process with what they call, maybe you could call the initial agreement, where the families come together and they basically agree that this young boy is going to marry this young lady or this young girl. And when they do that, they may gather with the imam to do a provisional aqd, basically to write down the commitment that's being made between this couple and so on and so forth. And after they do that, after they just come to agreement verbally, or they actually do something in writing, they'll tell the imam, okay, imam, al-Fatiha. Okay, imam, read al-Fatiha. Now that we've done this aqd, read al-Fatiha. And the imam will say, there's no basis for reading Al-Fatiha and Aqd al-Nikah. When the agreement, whether it's just a verbal agreement or a written agreement, there's no basis for that a person would recite Al-Fatiha at that point. And because reciting Al-Fatiha is a religious deed, we shouldn't do it we shouldn't create an occasion for doing it. And if we do that, that's actually a type of bid'ah. It's actually a type of innovation. And the Imam will say this, and he will explain, very respectfully to the people, and they will say, this is the way we do in our country. We're expecting you to do it. We'll be offended if you don't do it, etc., etc., and so on. These are 3 examples. I could go on and on. I could mention other examples which are highly controversial. But rather than mention those because of their controversial nature, I'll just avoid those. But these 3 examples are enough for you to see that there's a mistake that we are making commonly in our communities as it relates to the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. We're not supposed to tell them. We're supposed to ask them. And when they tell us the deen says this, the deen says this, Allah says that, the messenger says this, we're supposed to listen to that. Why? Because they are the learned people. They're put in that position for that reason, to guide us, not for us to what? To ignore them and try to force them to do things which are in contradiction to Allah's guidance. طيب, another text that we mentioned in this whole context of the ayat and the hadith which show that seeking knowledge is very important in our religion, essential in our religion, is the hadith of Anas, collected by Ibn Majah, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ Muslim. Seeking knowledge is obligatory upon every Muslim. طيب, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean that all of us are expected to study and become scholars in our own right? Every single Muslim has to become an expert in religious knowledge? And no Muslim could specialize, for example, just in medicine, specialize just in engineering, specialize just in some other science or discipline. But every Muslim has to become a scholar. And if he wanted to specialize in these other things, he'd have to dedicate, 10 years to Islamic knowledge and then another 10 years to this other form of study, etc. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean that every Muslim has to become a scholar, has to become an expert in religious sciences, but rather it means that every Muslim must study that amount of knowledge, study that which he or she is not permitted to be unaware of. Every Muslim must learn about their religion, those things which they are not permitted. It is not legal, it's not lawful, it's not acceptable for them to be unaware of this. Those are things that they have to study. Or to put it differently, they have to study those things which they would have to know in order to fulfill their religious obligations. So for example, every Muslim has to believe in certain things. We are obligated to have iman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, aminu. Oh, you who believe, believe. Have faith. We're supposed to believe in certain things, right? So that would mean that every Muslim is obligated to know those beliefs, know those things that we're supposed to believe, and believe in them. So that knowledge is something that it's indispensable. We have to seek that knowledge, and we can't be oblivious of what it means to believe in Allah, to believe in His angels. What are the angels, right? This knowledge, we have to know that, because why? It's a wajib. Similarly, the knowledge of salat, the knowledge of prayer. Every Muslim has to pray, right? Prayer is obligatory. Bunya Islam ala khams, shahadati an la ilaha illallah wa Muhammadur Rasulullah, wa iqam as-salah. Islam is built upon 5. The first one is shahada, the second one, as-salat, right? So as-salat is obligatory upon every Muslim. Every Muslim has to know how to pray. They have to know what are the number of raka'at for fajr, for dhuhr, for asr, right? What are the arkan? What are the fundamental conditions and prerequisites of the prayer? What are the essential aspects of the prayer without which there will be no prayer? What if a person makes a mistake in prayer? How does he correct the mistake? If he doesn't recite Al-Fatiha, is that prayer valid or not? He has to know these things, because why? It's wajib upon him to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he can't pray to Allah properly without what? Without this knowledge. Similarly, as-siyam. Every Muslim has to fast, right? And there are some Muslims who are required to make a zakat, to pay a zakat. That Muslim who's required to pay a zakat has to know the rules and regulations and ahkam related to what a zakat. That is the meaning of the statement of Allah, the statement of the Prophet when he said, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ Muslim. Seeking knowledge is obligatory upon every Muslim means every Muslim must know that which is necessary for him to fulfill his religious obligations. Another hadith we mentioned was the hadith in which the Prophet said, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. that whenever Allah wants good for a person, He educates him in the affairs of his religion. And this is important. I just want to point out a very important point that the scholars of Islam, a number of them, among them As-San'ani, rahimahullah ta'ala, have mentioned that mafhum al-mukhalafa murad, that the opposite meaning of this hadith is intended, which means a sign that Allah does not want good for a person is when He does not educate him regarding his religion. So we have to feel uncomfortable. We have to feel a certain sense of worry and concern if, for whatever reason, we are not learned in our deen. And I mean learned according to what we just said, learned to that level which is required for what? For what we have to do, right? Our religious obligations. If we are ignorant of some of these things that we talked about, that we have to know as Muslims, every Muslim has to know these things. If we're ignorant of those things, that's a concern. That's something that should concern us. Why? Because it's a sign that Allah doesn't want good for us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those who He wants good for. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. But ثم بعد ذلك, after we mention all these nusus and how these nusus tell us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to actively seek knowledge of what it means to really be a Muslim and to follow Islam and to lead an Islamic life, we said that, but seeking knowledge is not enough. Allah doesn't want us to just stop there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just doesn't want us to learn for the sake of learning, but rather He wants us to learn to practice what we have learned. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to learn so that we can have faith, but also that we can live our faith. Our faith can be a living faith, a faith that has what? Has real tangible benefit and tangible meaning. So we mentioned two problems related to that, two obstacles to achieving that. We said the first one is illiteracy. And we were trying to get to the other problem, and we didn't want to make it seem like we were skipping over illiteracy. Basically, as if to say that illiteracy, yeah, it happens, it happens. No, it is a problem. Illiteracy is a problem in our community. It is unfortunate. There are many Muslims who just do not know some of the basics of their religion. And this is a problem. Part of the reason why we are not meeting Allah's expectations as Muslims. We are not practicing Islam the way it ought to be practiced. Part of the problem in that is the fact that many Muslims are simply uneducated. Many Muslims simply do not know what the expectations are. And what saddens me about this particular issue in our community is that not only do we have this problem with ignorance, and not only do I see it in a lot of demographics, but specifically in our young people. The future of Islam, many of them are very, very, very ignorant, very illiterate when it comes to their religion. And I've seen it specifically on college campuses, when some of these Muslims are becoming more attached, more committed, more, they have this strong desire now to what? To come back to their faith or become active in their faith. But they are putting the cart before the horse because they're becoming active in Islam, Islamic circles, Islamic discussions and dialogue, but they don't have the requisite knowledge for doing any of that. And so you'll see these people speaking very passionately with a lot of conviction and saying things which are in direct opposition to what Islam teaches. And they are very assertive. They have full confidence that what they're saying is right. And you ask yourself, you have to say to yourself, the only possible explanation for them saying this thing, which is in stark contradiction to what Islam teaches, is the fact that they simply don't know. But then that begs a question, or that begs the question. If they don't know, why do they speak? Why do they speak? Why do they insist on putting the cart before the horse? Why do they insist about speaking about things that they don't know? Know, and then what? And then speak. And we just talked about the ayah, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ. Know that there's no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and then seek forgiveness for your sin. What did the scholars derive from that, like Al-Bukhari and others? They derive from that, they extrapolated from that Allah is teaching us al-ilmu qabla al-qawli wal-amal. That knowledge must precede statements and actions. We have to know before we what? Before we speak. So this issue of illiteracy, it is a big problem in the community. But the problem that we really wanted to stress on, a very real problem in our community, is the problem of what? The problem of knowing and not practicing. Muslims who suffice themselves with knowing. But beyond knowing, they don't practice. They know, but they don't practice what they know, or even worse, they act in contradiction to what they know. This is an even bigger problem that we wanted to address, and we mentioned some examples of that. We mentioned some examples in the khutbah. For example, we mentioned the example of Allah doesn't want us to just know that inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Allah doesn't want us to just know that verily the most virtuous of you, the most highly regarded of you in the sight of Allah, are those who have the most piety. That Allah doesn't want us to just know that. Allah wants us to put that into practice. And the problem that we have, brothers and sisters, is that most of us know that. This is Islam 101. We know that. We know that there's no racism in Islam, but there is racism in the Muslim community. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to know that Islam disapproves of racism and then go out and be what? And be racist. We mentioned the hadith where the Prophet said, La fadla ala Arabiyyin. I'm sorry, La fadla li Arabiyyin ala A'jami. Wala li Ahmar ala Aswad illa bittaqwa. The hadith where the Prophet said there's no superiority for an Arab over a non-Arab or a white over a black except with piety. Allah doesn't want us to just know that. He wants us to put that into practice. And we mentioned the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Muslim akhul Muslim, la yadlimuhu wa la yakhdhuluhu, wa la yakdhibuhu, wa la yahqiruh. We said, Allah doesn't want us to just know that a Muslim is the brother of his fellow Muslim. He doesn't want us to just know that. He wants us to put that into practice, to live like that, to have a living faith, not the faith that we just talk about, but a faith that manifests itself, a faith that we embody, a faith that other people can see and say, look at the Muslims, look how they get on, look how they behave. Before we even open our mouths to call, people can see what we're about. That's what Allah wants. And we mentioned these three examples, and all of them had to do with racial tensions, the issue of race, racism, in some way, shape, or form. And we may be getting to a point where some people might be saying, enough. Enough of this talk about racism generally, or racism in the Muslim community specifically. Enough. Enough in general, enough, Imam. Imam, enough. You were very explicit about this issue in the khutbah 3 weeks back about George Floyd. Then you come last week and you kind of allude to it. You hint at it with the khutbah about following the footsteps of Shaitan. Part of his footsteps was what? The superiority complex, the supremacist ideology, the first bigot, the first racist, Shaitan. And now you come and you hint at it again, talking about how we know about racism. We know Islam doesn't approve of racism, but we practice it. Enough. Enough. Get over it already. No, brothers and sisters, if this isn't a watershed moment, we need to make it one. We need to keep talking about this issue until racism is totally eradicated in our communities. And race relations in our mosques change forever. We cannot stop talking about this. We've got to ride this momentum, ride this wave until we come back to Allah. Brothers and sisters, we're not talking about this because we're black or African American. We're not talking about this because we're hypersensitive. We're talking about this because it is wrong. It's wrong in the deen of Allah, and it's been going on since, for me, it's been going on since I've been Muslim, but it's been going on in the Muslim community for centuries. For centuries we've had this problem and we have not dealt with it. This is our chance, brothers and sisters, to clean up our house. We have to stop acting, brothers and sisters, like this isn't a problem. Oh, it's being blown out of proportion. Made bigger than what it really is. And just to show you that it's not that. It's not just a bunch of some particular imams with some particular ethnic affiliations. They're the ones making a big deal out of this because they're hypersensitive. It's not that. And how do we know this? Because many people, including Muslim celebrities and non-Muslim celebrities from immigrant communities, they themselves are speaking out about it. They themselves are saying that this is a problem. It's not just people being outside of the communities who are sensitive. No, we're in the communities and we're telling you this is a problem. Whether those people, those celebrities, those Muslims and non-Muslim celebrities and personalities are from the Desi community, from the Arab community, from the Indian community, they're all coming forward. A number of them are coming forward, posting things on social media. Some of you perhaps have seen some of these posts and speaking very candidly about people from their own communities, how those people feel about people with dark skin from their community. That they themselves are telling you, people from our own community, they have dark skin, this is how we feel about them, let alone how we feel about Africans and African Americans. And I'm going to give 2 examples out of Ujala just to show you that this is really an issue. This is not some people making making a mountain out of a molehill. This is really an issue. One is, for example, Hassan Minhaj. He did a very nice piece, about a 12-minute long piece. If you do a search for it on YouTube search, and you write, for example, Hassan Minhaj on George Floyd, the piece will come up. It's 12 minutes. It's a very good piece. It's well worth 12 minutes of your time to watch this piece from Hassan Minhaj. And in that piece, he said, look, I can't speak for what it's like to be black, but I know how we, and when he says we, he's talking about the Desi community, how we talk about black people, and it is messed up. And he didn't say messed up. He used profanity. I'm not going to use profanity, obviously. He said Asians, we love seeing black excellence. Barack, Michelle, Jay-Z, Beyonce, give me the Travis Scott 4s. How could we be afraid? We love black America. Yeah, on screen, in our living rooms. But if a black man walked into our living room or wants to, God forbid, marry your daughter, you call the cops. He also mentioned in his community, the Desi community, they have a special pejorative, an especially derogative term that they use to describe black people. And he goes on to say, it's bad to be black in Desi culture. We don't even like praying at the same mosques as black people. These are his words, not mine. Go to the video and listen to it yourself. So I'm going to give you another example. Arundhati Roy. She's an Indian author, political activist. I think she even does some acting, etc. And she's not a Muslim. As far as I know, she's not a Muslim. So she can't speak from the Muslim Indian perspective, but she can speak authoritatively and credibly from the Indian perspective in general. She can tell you how Indians view this issue. And she does. She does. She did an interview, and in that interview, she was asked a lot of questions about race and race relations in Indian culture, about the caste system, all of those things. Colorism, how they look at color, and how they almost worship white skin, etc. In the course of that interview, she said, Indian racism towards black people is almost worse than white people's racism. It's unbelievable. I've seen it happen on the streets when I've been with black friends, and sometimes it comes from people whose skin color is really no different. They're just as dark as the people they criticize. Rarely have I been so enraged and ashamed. And when she was asked about why racist stereotypes and negative portrayals of blacks abound in Indian news and entertainment media, she simply replied, because we are a racist culture. She's saying the Indian culture is a racist culture. These are her words, not mine. You can go to the article. It was in, I think it's the DalitDaily.com. I think that's what it is, DalitDaily.com. You'll find the article online. And it's a long article, a long interview, I should say. And it has some very, very good points in it. These are just 2 of them. So these are just 2 examples, brothers and sisters, that we can give to show that this is a real problem. And that's why we have to address it. We have to deal with it, brothers and sisters. Like I said, if this is not already a watershed moment, we have to make it a watershed moment. We have to make this the moment where we turn the corner, where things are different, where we can actually look back at this moment in time and say, before that, it was like this, and after that, it was what? It was different. We have to make it like that. It's only going to be like that if we talk about it. We have some serious and sometimes painful dialogue. And then we what? We implement change. It's just not a matter of, putting out a statement, Black Lives Matter, putting out a post on your social media, Black Lives Matter, and then we're done with it. No, there are some issues we have internally that we have to deal with. And the way we deal with it is through faith. What does our faith say? And acting in accordance with our faith says. Knowing that and acting in accordance, which was the basic theme of the khutbah. I want to close by saying, brothers and sisters, that knowing and not practicing, or knowing and acting in contradiction to what we know, these are two very dangerous things. Which is one of the reasons why we have to wake up. We have to wake up and change ourselves, change the way we approach deen. Stop being the people who make the deen a culture. Make the deen a ritual, a routine. No, our faith has to be a living faith. Our lives have to be influenced by what we know. Our actions have to be influenced and dictated and informed by what we know. And I'm going to mention two reasons why we can't be like this. Although there are a number of reasons that show that this is harmful for us. One of them has to do with the hereafter and one has to do with the herein. As far as the herein, this knowledge is a fadl, it's a virtue, it's a blessing, it's a gift from Allah. And if we don't use it, we're going to lose it. Allah's going to take it away from us. Allah's not going to let us have His gift if we're not going to appreciate it. He's not going to let us have this knowledge of Him and His religion if we don't act by it. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he used to say, هَتَفَ الْعِلْمُ بِالْعَمَلِ فَإِنْ أَجَابَ وَإِلَّا إِرْتَحَلْ. He used to say, knowledge cries for action. If action answers, if it comes, if it joins knowledge, it stays. وَإِلَّا, and if not, إِرْتَحَلْ. Knowledge what? It goes away. Knowledge has to have a partner, and its partner is action. The only partner it'll accept is action. The second reason why this is dangerous has to do with the hereafter. And we have the very famous hadith of Bukhari Muslim on the authority of Usama ibn Zayd, in which the Prophet ﷺ, he said that a man will be brought on the day of judgment, thrown, flung into the hellfire, and his intestines will begin to what? To pour out. And he'll begin to spin around and around. His intestines connected, for example, on one end to some type of what? Pole. And connected to his body on the other end, he'll go around and around like a donkey driving a mill. A grain mill, round and around. And the people of hellfire will gather around him. They will recognize him and gather around him. And they'll say, Ya fulan, malak. Oh, so-and-so, what's wrong with you? You. Alam takun ta'mur bil ma'ruf wa tanha al munkar. Weren't you the one in the world? We remember you. You used to command the good and forbid the evil. You were that knowledgeable person who said the deen says this and the deen says this and you can't do this and you can't do that. You have to do this and you have to do that. That was you. How can you be in the hellfire? And the man will say, Bala, indeed. Kuntu amru bil ma'ruf wa la ati. I used to tell the people to do the right thing, but I didn't do it myself. Wa anha al munkar wa ati. And I would prohibit the people from doing the wrong things, but then I would do them myself. Brothers and sisters, knowing and not acting, or knowing and acting in contradiction to what we know, is very dangerous in this world and hereafter. So we have to change our attitude about deen, change our attitude about knowledge of deen, and be the people who live the knowledge, practice the knowledge, embody the knowledge that we've gained. I want to close by saying, brothers and sisters, that these last sermons are not an attempt to solicit pity. I am not looking for pity. These last 3 khutbahs are an attempt to do what I have been trying to do since I have been doing this type of work. See a problem in faith and correct it for our sake. Point out something that we ourselves may be oblivious to, so we can be aware of it and we can correct it. We can know better, so we can do better. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.